back in README. Bonus credit. Make that button work. Who made that button work? Just two? This is considerably harder. Don't feel too bad. There's a lot to wrap your head around when it comes to using React for the first time. Who tried? Who didn't try? Who didn't raise their hand either time? Did you try? No? Is that what that means? This is outrageous. Nobody wants to learn. By the way, you all do know this is only, I said this in the morning too, even though everybody tried. Don't forget about the website and that we put notes up there every day. There are a lot of detailed examples up there. There are even some code pins from time to time. We can try some of this stuff out live in an interactive environment. We always link to documentation in more detail than we sometimes have time to cover in class. So, feel free to check that out. Yeah, it's going to stay up. The one from last year is still up. Yep, it'll be there. Have no fear. So let's make this button work. So this requires an understanding of state and props for sure. So what is state? State represents the data that's internal to a component. It lives only in that component. Props are basically how we pass things between components. So from one component to another. And everything in ThingList involves that same list, right? So it's going to have to be shared across lots of components. So we put it up at the app level. So it lives in the app component's state. Now that means the app component is the only one that gets to change it. And we know we don't change it directly. We use set state because that gives React a chance to actually redraw the page since things have changed. Problem is, our add thing button is not in app.js. It's in another one. So we have to communicate between these two things. And that was easy enough when we were just passing that array down, or it wasn't an array, it was an object, passing that down to the list and passing it from there to an individual thing. But now we have an action we need to take. So if you're not sure where to start, just do a part that you can handle. Maybe add a function that will add a thing even if it's not something that you typed in. Maybe just make a function that adds one more thing to that list. See if you can do that much. So where are we going to make this function? It needs to be an app.js, right? Because that's the only one that's allowed to touch state.things. And you'll see most of the time that people initialize state inside the constructor. We're using a newer feature that is not yet officially in ECMAScript that lets us initialize that using a property initializer like this. But that's kind of non-standard at this point. So just know you will usually see it inside the constructor. So we need a function that's going to add things. How about we call it add thing? Good enough for me. It's a method. And what's it going to do? Add one more thing to state things. How do we access that object from in here? How could I get to this? Yeah. This.state.things indeed. And depending on how add thing is called, we may or may not be certain that this will be the right thing at the time. But so far, we haven't done anything that's going to change the binding of this, so we'll leave it. So we learned we don't want to modify state directly, so we're not going to actually change this object. We're going to make a copy of this object. So let's do that. Let's make a variable inside our method, const things equals. Now, if we just do this, that will not be a copy. Remember, objects are passed around by reference in JavaScript. So we want to make a copy of it. And we're going to take advantage of a newer feature. Strictly speaking, this is not part of ECMAScript and is actually not even a proposal, but it's supported in Babel, and it's used pretty widely within React because everyone uses Babel anyway because you have to for JSX. So we're going to use it. Check it out. So you may remember yesterday we copied an array this way. Now that is part of ES6. Doing it with objects is not. It has to be an iterable thing. But it works in Babel, so we're going to do it. So this is a really easy way to make a copy of an object. What that does is it takes this ellipsis operator, which is called a spread syntax, takes all of the individual properties of that object and spreads them out. And then we throw some curly braces around it, and they end up inside our new object. So effectively, we've just copied an object. Really easy way to do it. And this would be called things. So now we need a new individual thing, right, that we're going to add. So let's make a thing. Const thing equals, and we can make a hard-coded one if you want. Thing 4. Got to start somewhere. What's nearly as delicious as bib lettuce? Steel cut Irish oatmeal. Yeah, that's good stuff. So now we want to add that to things. Don't worry about state yet. Remember, we have things stored in this local variable. How would I add that thing to the things object? I have something I want to put in an object. I know you can put things in objects. We're not worrying about state yet. We will be doing that. Yannick. So you can add new properties to a thing using to an object by using things square bracket and then putting a key in there, right? And then assigning it to something. So what should the key of this thing be? Yeah. Did you hear that? Darn it. So it makes sense, right? How have we been doing this? These are all using a key that matches the ID of the thing itself. So things.thing.id, things bracket thing.id equals thing. All right, now things is what it was before plus one more thing, right? Now, we've updated our local variable, but state is still what it was before. Clayton, how would I update state? This.setState, we learned, is how we have to update state. Can't do it directly. So we need to tell it a little more. We need to tell it what part of state to update, right? So we would say something like things, colon, and then whatever we want the things to be, which is our local variable things. And we've learned several times now that in ES6, if the value of a property happens to be stored in a variable with the same name as the key, you can shorten this and just say things. Now, if there were other properties on state, like we have state things, and we also have state other things, is setting state like this going to blow this away? It is not. It's only going to update the key that you send it. You don't have to replace the entire state at once. All right, let's see if it's all true. Now we may need to make the button do this. If we don't even want to try that yet, if we're not that brave, let's see if this function even works. Pop open our developer tools, our React dev tools. Here's our app component selected in the list. Here are the props, here are the things, there's 3 of them. Now, because I have this highlighted, $R in the console will be app component. So $R dot add thing. You believe? Yeah. All right. We added a thing. So let's make the button do that. Problem is the button is not in app component. It's in add thing button component. But this is the method that does it. So how are we going to get that method to the add thing button component? How do we get anything from one component to another? How do we get something? Who said that? Okay. Props, right? Props are how we send things between components. So how do I do that? How do I get add thing into add thing button? How do I do it? We know we need to use a prop. What do props look like? If I want to add any prop whatsoever to add thing button, where do I do that? In the tag, right? They just look like attributes. So we'll add an attribute here. We'll call it add thing. Perfectly good name, nothing wrong with it. We could change it if we wanted to. The important thing is the value here is what? This dot add thing, right? Because add thing is a method on our component. So this dot add thing. No parentheses. We're not invoking it right now. That would pass in the return value of add thing as a prop. We want to pass in the method itself. We've learned that we can pass methods around like any other objects. So now in add thing button, how do I get to it now that I've passed it in? Props. So it'll be passed in as an argument. Since we did this as a functional stateless component, it'll be in an argument here. So we can get to all our props just like that, whatever we put up there. We learned another trick yesterday. If we just want to get a specific prop and we want it to be accessible as a local variable, so we don't have to say props dot all the time, we can use this trick to destructure that and give it the name of the prop, add thing. And what that will do is the argument will be destructured into its various components. In this case, just the component that we've named, add thing. So anything else from our props, we just haven't given a name to. Now we could by doing something like this. The rest of the props, we don't need them right now, so I'm not. So if this looks familiar, it's basically what we're doing here with component. So component was a named export from React. Heaven knows how many named exports there are from React. I certainly don't know, but there's a lot more than just component. But component's the only one we needed, so we just put the brackets here and named it, and that gets just that one thing out of there. Same deal here. The argument has heaven knows how many properties. We're only interested in add thing at the moment. So what do we do with add thing now that we have it? When do we want to call it? Under what circumstances do we want to call that function? Jack. On click. So here we have a button. On click. That is camel cased in JSX. On click. Add thing. Now, riddle me this. When we get back to add thing, what will the value of this be? What will it not be? The app component, because it's an event handler. Now, if this were just the regular old DOM, this would be the thing that the event fired on, right? Not so in React, it's actually undefined. So how do we make it what we want? We learned 2 ways to do that yesterday. We could say bind this right here at the time that we set up the event listener. But we're not going to do it that way right now. Come on, you. I'm just doing this for readability's sake. While it's on my screen. What's another way we learn to do that? We could do it in the constructor, right? Add a constructor. You don't need to type this because we're not doing it this way either. In the constructor, don't forget to call super. And then we could say this.addThing equals this.addThing bind this. Then that binding will stick. But we're going to learn a new trick. We're going to use a property initializer. Now we use that to set state here, and we can do that for methods too. This again is in the proposal in the draft stage of the standard. So it doesn't work everywhere. It doesn't work on CodePen, even though CodePen can run through Babel, because it just doesn't have the right settings in Babel. But we can use it in Create React App because the Babel settings do support it. And I like it, so I'm going to use it. So to do that, you put an assignment here. You assign add thing to an arrow function, and that makes it a method of that class, automatically bound to the object itself. Now we know there's going to be an event passed here as an argument. We're not going to do anything with it though, so I'm not going to bother naming it. But since it is handling an event, that will be passed in. Does it work? Refresh the page. I did refresh the page. Let's add one more thing. Ready? Kaboom! The button does a thing. Never mind that we didn't type that in there. At least the button did something. So again, we had to add this method to the app component because it's the only thing that's allowed to change that state. A state is internal to a component. But our button is elsewhere. So we have to know about that method from another component to pass something, whether it's data or a method or anything else. From one component to another, we use props. Props look like attributes. Here it is. Add thing equals this.add thing. We receive that argument over here. We're destructuring it because we're cool. And then we just add an on-click to the button. And everything is magical. Add a hard-coded thing when the button is pressed.